Again and again in the suttas, the Buddha would point to the danger in attaching to sense pleasures, mundane pleasures. He would speak about the gratification, the danger, and the escape. We can appreciate the gratification. In this case, he's saying we can appreciate how we see sights and they bring up delight. We can relish and enjoy and find a lot of happiness. Pleasant feelings arise, in short, when we see something that we find pleasant. In the same way, hearing beautiful sounds, tasting delicious flavors, smelling pleasant fragrances, the touch can be so lovely for us. In all these ways, we can notice how we have pleasant experiences, and what tends to happen is that then the danger comes in. So the gratification is obvious. The gratification is in the pleasure we can experience through our sense doors. But then the danger comes along, which is that we start to, however subtly or overtly, we start to lean towards those pleasures. We start to become attached to them, don't we? We start to want more of them. This can then be the source of a lot of suffering for us, because when we don't get them, then we long for them, we miss them, we feel unhappy. We can spend a lot of time working and striving and doing our utmost to actually get back to those pleasures. So we're kind of caught and trapped in this way. This is the danger of sense pleasures. And of course, the escape is to let go, to learn through cultivating the practice, to let go of that tendency to glom onto, grab onto, hold on to sense delights, sense pleasures. So we have to be mindful in order to notice this, don't we? And we have to develop our awareness to the extent that we can see this happening. And we can then, through understanding the process, we can then notice how the mind can let go, can discern, oh, this is suffering. Oh, I don't want to pursue this. I want to let go of this course of action. So let's go back to the sutta now and see how the Buddha proceeds from here. So he says, now take a mendicant who, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unskillful qualities, enters and remains in the first absorption, the first jhāna, which has the rapture and bliss born of seclusion, while placing the mind and keeping it connected. As the placing of the mind and keeping it connected are stilled, they enter and remain in the second absorption, the third absorption, the fourth absorption. And we won't go into the details of these at this point. But to continue, this is called the pleasure of renunciation, the pleasure of seclusion, the pleasure of peace, the pleasure of awakening. Such pleasure should be cultivated and developed, and should not be feared, I say. Know how to assess different kinds of pleasure. Knowing this, pursue inner bliss. Sukha is the word for bliss. That's what I said, and this is why I said it. So here we have the Buddha pointing out that there are pleasures that are more refined, more subtle, and far more powerfully uplifting, far stronger, far brighter than the sense pleasures that we can experience through the 5 or 6 sense doors. The 6th sense door being that of the mind, thinking. So, if we can put aside, even for moments, the input through all these 6 sense doors, how do we do that? We do that through conscious letting go, conscious renunciation, don't we? To actually sit and do nothing. To actually close the eyes, put aside food, put aside flavors, put aside entertainment. We don't have to stick our fingers in our ears, do we? But we don't necessarily want to give attention to sounds, but rather to bring the attention here. And when we start to do this, which is of course called meditation, when we start to meditate, follow the Buddha's teachings and develop some degree of stillness, then we can appreciate the deep and very profound pleasure and well-being that we can experience in having a mind that is peaceful, that is not reaching out, seeking pleasure elsewhere. We start to notice that when we stop doing that, there's actually quite a wellspring within of peace and well-being. And this is a process, for most of us. We start to meditate and we can feel actually it's quite a struggle. It's not easy to meditate necessarily. And indeed, when we start to meditate, often we're faced with the difficulties that we may have been holding on to for a very long time. Pain, stress, all sorts of emotional baggage that we may have been sitting on for a very long time. And these things will come up onto the surface of the mind, and we have to face them. And that's the first thing that happens often in meditation practice. It can be challenging. It requires quite a lot of faith, doesn't it? And determination to just keep going, just to trust that there's something wholesome happening here as the mind kind of cleans itself out. There's a purification process going on here. But slowly and surely, inevitably, if we continue to meditate, we start to experience some degree of peace, don't we? Some degree of relaxation, some degree of well-being. So this is really what the Buddha's pointing to. Every kind of sense pleasure has its danger, and that does include these more refined states of bliss, inner well-being, spiritual pleasure, spiritual bliss, rather than worldly or sensual bliss. We have to be quite careful not to get attached even to the most refined and subtle and wholesome sources of pleasure. Everything needs to be seen through. Every source of attachment needs to be let go of. It's interesting how the Buddha lived a very luxurious life, and then while a bodhisattva, he went on to practice the most extreme austerities. So he knew both extremes, self-indulgence, sensory indulgence, and also extreme asceticism. And he knew that neither of them were really getting him anywhere. And he came to a point where he recognized there must be a middle way between these extremes. Why don't I try meditating just as I remember doing when I was a little boy, sitting under a tree? And I was so peaceful and it was so delightful, just watching the breath, sitting under a tree. And he remembered this, didn't he? And then he recognized that actually this was the way to proceed. This was likely to be a helpful practice. And so he started to develop the jhānas 1, 2, 3, and 4, and to begin to examine, see more deeply into this mind and body, and to be able to discern where the suffering was and how to let go of that suffering. And so in the Buddha's own journey, these jhana were very important to get him on the straight way, to get him on the path. But then he also covers the fact that even if we get attached to these factors, these jhana, we're going to fall off the path. We need to use them very skillfully. We need to use them for inspiration, uplift, a certain amount of insight, and then to apply the insights that we can glean from a mind that's very still, very quiet, and very peaceful. We can use that mind to then root out any kilesa, any sources of suffering. And this is what we need to be doing. So rather than getting attached to these states, we want to take them as fuel for the journey. Any subtle states of bliss and happiness, okay, let's be willing to let go of that, but take that insight and apply it to uprooting the defilements. I'm sure a lot of us enjoy meditating in certain circumstances, certain surroundings. We like quiet places. We like to be maybe in solitude, and we like to be in nature. And a lot of people find it so helpful to sit out in nature. That's entirely wholesome. And indeed, we can learn so much from the nature around us, because nature is Dhamma. Dhamma in action follows the rules, as it were. We can learn a lot just watching the way plants grow and the way the weather moves and changes and so forth. And so in many ways, it can be a very strong support for our practice to observe nature, to be out in nature. It's really helpful and it's nice, and there's nothing wrong with it, with going out and seeking beautiful places to sit, meditate. And then we can notice that as much as we relish or come to enjoy these things, well, when they then cease, we will notice if there's any attachment there. And that's very good too. We can see how we're creatures of habit, and we'll tend to get into a lovely routine, and then, oh, the seasons change and we have to do something different. And we can just see how that impacts the mind. It's very lovely to meditate in nature, but it can sometimes be distracting a little bit, just because we might find ourselves wanting to listen to the birds or to watch the sea or whatever. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's just, again, we're coming into the seeing and the hearing and so forth. Well, we can observe all of that, but it is quite nice also to be able to really focus on the body, what's happening inside, the feelings in the body, the breath. And if we are in a very peaceful place, a quiet place, it's in some ways easier to do that. And of course, we can get attached to that quiet, and, so it goes. I would certainly trust your discernment around where you meditate and make the most of nature, and just notice where there's liking and disliking, and see where attachments arise. And you can, through seeing that, you can let go of them and just keep freeing the heart wherever you sit. It's wonderful to see the inclination of the mind to daydream, the inclination towards this or that sense pleasure, and the result, aiming to cultivate mindfulness to the extent that we can observe all these things playing out in our lives, our preferences, our likes and dislikes. None of it's not okay, it's all fine, but noticing the impact of all our various behaviors and learning through experience. If we're really aware, we can notice how we're understanding what's happening, and we start to free up as a result, and get to a point really where we take or leave certain things. We don't have to miss things when they pass if we're aware of anicca. If we're really conscious of impermanence, then when things change, we're not surprised and we don't suffer. Everything's Dharma for us, everything's teaching us, if we have this degree of mindfulness. In everyday life, if we have the chance to experience some stillness, some peace, even jhāna in our meditation practice, that can be extremely helpful for us, because there are so many challenges in everyday life. It's good to cultivate these concentrated or still states of mind, particularly on retreat, when we have a chance to practice without any distraction, and maybe really cultivate these states of mind that are very still and peaceful. In these situations, one can notice that we can tend to hold on, when in fact we're much better off experiencing some peace and stillness, and then actually applying that degree of attention, that degree of stillness, and actually coming back to the body and investigating further, coming into the mind and investigating, is there anything here that needs attention? Are there any sources of suffering still to be found? If there's a chance to experience the jhāna in a more consistent way, then we can start to notice, okay, let's look at the danger here. But if we, in day-to-day life, have an opportunity to really relax, to really have a quiet, still mind, well, that's wonderful. And it's very good to meditate in such a way that we're actually moving in that direction. It can be so helpful for us, because we become peaceful, and then we're out and about, and we're extending that to all those around us. Why is the Buddha giving this teaching in an exposition on non-conflict? It's very relevant. The Buddha speaks about how sense desire and the tendency that we have to develop greed around sense desire, wanting, attachment to sense pleasures. He says that these tendencies are the cause of all the disharmony in this world. They're the cause of all the terrible things that happen, all the fighting, all the wars, all the ways in which people attack and harm and hurt one another. So in that context, we can see that there's a connection. When the Buddha's telling us, you want to steer away from the dangers of sensual pleasures, sense delights, perhaps underlying this teaching that the reason is that it will tend to promote disharmony, because we will tend to want to get our share in one way or another. And this can lead to disharmony. And don't we see that all around us in the world? This sutta I'm thinking of and referring to is all about the relationship between our tendency to get caught up in sense desire and the unwholesome results, which can go all the way to large-scale conflict. We can all consider this connection, delve deeper into the connection between greed and all the negative, hostile emotions such as anger, hatred, and so forth. And how greed and hatred are like two sides of the same coin. You can't really have much of one without some of the other. And that's very interesting to observe, both externally and also within ourselves. I can say I'm not at all a hateful person, but I do have some greed. Well, if that's the case, I'm likely to have a bit of aversion as well when I don't get what I want. The Buddha says, know how to assess different kinds of pleasure. Knowing this, pursue inner bliss. That's what I said, and this is why I said it. In this exposition on non-conflict, the Buddha goes on, don't talk behind people's backs and don't speak sharply in their presence. That is what I said. But why did I say it? When you know that what you say behind someone's back is untrue, false, and harmful, then if at all possible, you should not speak. When you know that what you say behind someone's back is true and correct, but harmful, then you should train yourself not to speak. When you know that what you say behind someone's back is true, correct, and beneficial, then you should know the right time to speak. An encouragement really to be very careful. When we speak to someone directly, we'll behave in a certain way and speak in a certain way. When we're speaking about people who are not present, sometimes there's more of a danger of saying things that they may not really have wanted to hear. If they were present, that they would really find upsetting or difficult to hear. Can I bring them into this space and speak as if they were standing right in front of me? What would I say? How would I speak? I find that a helpful way to reflect on this kind of teaching. So if what we're saying behind someone's back is going to be false, we shouldn't say it. That's obvious, really, isn't it? If we know it's true, but it's harmful, we should work hard to train ourselves not to speak. If we know it's true, correct, and beneficial, then we should know the right time to speak. So in a way, the Buddha is saying we can speak behind someone's back, but only if what we have to say is beneficial and true. Knowing the right time, if there's a right time, to speak behind someone's back, speaking the truth, speaking to benefit, in some way to benefit others, oneself or others, but knowing also the right time. It's a delicate business, isn't it, to speak of those not present? Careful, careful. review what's been said and learn from the mistakes. And oftentimes this is a challenge because we may have habits of speech, but we can really follow the Buddha's guidance and refine and improve. It's a constant opportunity, really, isn't it? Because we're relating all the time with others in this way. When it comes to speaking about people not present, always a little bit of caution. Is this really a good idea or not? Don't talk behind people's backs. And that's interesting, actually, just noting he's advising us not to do that unless the conditions are such, the time's right, it's helpful and it's true. So a rare event, perhaps, for us, mostly something to be avoided. And the Buddha says, don't speak sharply in their presence, face to face. When you know that your sharp words in someone's presence are untrue, false, and harmful, then if at all possible, you should not speak. When you know that your sharp words in someone's presence are true and correct, but harmful, then you should train yourself not to speak. When you know that your sharp words in someone's presence are true, correct, and beneficial, then you should know the right time to speak. Don't talk behind people's backs and don't speak sharply in their presence. This is what I said, and this is why I said it. So in exactly the same way as speaking behind people's backs, we should have the same self-examination, really, isn't it? Examination before we open our mouths. If we know we're intending, there's a inclination to speak sharply to somebody face to face, we better make sure what we have to say is correct and true and also of benefit. Is it going to be of benefit to anybody? And then we have to choose our time very carefully. So this really requires a lot of mindfulness, doesn't it? A lot of patience, willingness to hold back, a lot of, you could say, renunciation, letting go of our inclinations to blurt out, to be spontaneous, to, follow the inclination of the moment, and rather to check ourselves, rein it in, to hold back and examine and consider carefully before we launch into that which cannot be taken back. Once we've said something, that's it, isn't it? It's indelibly imprinted. We can't delete it, unfortunately, because so often we'll say things and we really didn't mean it, but we've blurted something out and then it becomes something like a defining aspect between ourselves and the other. How tragic, how awful it can be. And so how wonderful to have this advice, which I really take as a strong exhortation to pause and consider and reflect carefully, and to be super mindful not to allow ourselves to jump into speech. We can speak sharply to somebody, speaking the truth for their benefit or our benefit or somebody's benefit, for the greater good and at the right time for one person, but maybe for another person who's in the same space, it may not be the right time. Leads me into consideration of our ability to really gauge time and place, and what an incredible skill that is, and how much it asks of us often. Because if we're in a space where we're having a one-to-one conversation with somebody and we're doing all the right things to connect and relate skillfully with that person, but there are other people around, and we can perhaps not notice that, or we can be focusing so much on this one that we just don't see the bigger picture. It's an invitation, this kind of experience, for us to keep broadening the view and see how much we can notice. If I get caught up in any kind of mental state or emotion or even strong feeling, I can actually lose the awareness of the surroundings sometimes. We can get very fixated when we're upset about something. We can stop noticing, things like the weather or things like the environment around us. What encouragement this is to be aware that it's good to keep the view very broad and open. And it's a tall order sometimes, isn't it? Because we can have a lot going on internally that can take our attention, and that's not a bad thing when we need to pay attention to suffering here. But can we notice others even as we're doing this inner work? Can we be tuning in? We are asked really to just be so aware, so attentive, so mindful, in order to really appreciate the fullness of what's going on around us from moment to moment. Meditating is easy, isn't it? To sit in a quiet room or sit out in nature, sit out and just be alone. How easy is that? But when it comes to the marketplace, as it were, to the human community, this is where our practice is really put to the test often, isn't it? We're often put on the spot and we're often really challenged to do the right thing. We can learn from all these situations and that leave us with that sense of disquiet, something not quite right. Then we have an opportunity to understand more and hone our skills. Don't speak hurriedly. That's what I said, but why did I say it? This constant refrain from the Buddha. And he goes on, when speaking hurriedly, your body gets tired, your mind gets stressed, your voice gets stressed, your throat gets sore, and your words become unclear and hard to understand. When not speaking hurriedly, your body doesn't get tired, your mind doesn't get stressed, your voice doesn't get stressed, your throat doesn't get sore, and your words are clear and easy to understand. Don't speak hurriedly. That's what I said, and this is why I said it. So how interesting. Here we are, the exposition of non-conflict. And one of the tips from the Buddha is to speak slowly. We don't get stressed, and maybe also the people listening to us can hear us more easily. If I speak hurriedly, it's usually because I'm internally racing. And there's always a danger there, isn't there? If we're getting all heated and speedy, we're less likely to be able to be mindful and to check what we're saying before we say it. So this is a really helpful point. Don't insist on local terminology and don't override normal usage. That's what I said. But why did I say it? And how do you insist on local terminology and override normal usage? And he explains, it's when in different localities, the same thing is known as a plate or a bowl or a cup, a dish, a basin, a tureen, or a porringer. And however it's known in these various localities, you speak accordingly, obstinately sticking to that and insisting, this is the only truth. Other ideas are silly. That's how you insist on local terminology and override normal usage. And how do you not insist on local terminology and not override normal usage? But it's when in different localities, the same thing is known as a plate, a bowl, a cup, a dish, a basin, etc. And however it's known in these various localities, you speak accordingly, thinking it seems that the venerables are referring to this. That's how you don't insist on local terminology and don't override normal usage. Don't insist on local terminology and don't override normal usage. That is what I said, and this is why I said it. It helps peace and harmony and avoiding conflict if we can use the language in the place where we are, use the terms that people use in this place, in this time, speak in such a way that we can be understood. Don't quibble. If the way we talk in Britain is different from the way we talk in Canada or the way we talk in America, don't make a problem about it. Just speak in the way that people talk in America when you're in America, even if you're a Brit and you have a rather different way of speaking in your own country. That's what I understand this to mean, is to be flexible. And let's face it, the Buddha himself, we know very well, he was traveling from country to country in his day. It was probably a bit like traversing Europe over and over again, because India was very developed in those days, and there were so many different languages and cultures, and he would have been traveling from one country to another and presumably adapting his speech, his ways of behaving, and he's inviting the monks and nuns to do the same thing. So when we speak on Dhamma, to speak in such a way that we're respecting and tuning in to the local usage of language. If we behave in ways that are not culturally appropriate, we're challenging people and being a little bit disrespectful. What we're coming to now is a beautiful summary of the entire teaching, so we can just hear again these wonderful words of the Buddha and take them with us on our journey. Now, mendicants, pleasure linked to sensuality is low, crude, ordinary, ignoble, and pointless. Indulging in such happiness is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. That's why this is a principle beset by conflict. Breaking off such indulgence is a principle free of pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the right way. That's why this is a principle free from conflict. Indulging in self-mortification is painful, ignoble, and pointless. It is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. That's why this is a principle beset by conflict. Breaking off such indulgence in self-mortification is a principle free of pain, harm, stress, and fever. It is the right way. That is why this is a principle free of conflict. The middle way of practice, by which the realized one was awakened, gives vision and knowledge, and leads to peace, direct knowledge, awakening, and extinguishment, nibbana. It is a principle free of pain, harm, stress, or fever, and it is the right way. That's why this is a principle free of conflict. Flattering and rebuking without teaching Dhamma is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. That's why this is a principle beset by conflict. Neither flattering nor rebuking, and just teaching Dhamma is a principle free of pain, harm, stress, or fever, and it is the right way. That's why this is a principle free of conflict. Sensual pleasure, a filthy, common, ignoble pleasure, is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. That's why this is a principle beset by conflict. The pleasure of renunciation, the pleasure of seclusion, the pleasure of peace, the pleasure of awakening, is a principle free of pain, harm, stress, and fever. It is the right way. That's why this is a principle free of conflict. Saying untrue, false, and harmful things behind someone's back is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. That is why this is a principle beset by conflict. Saying true and correct but harmful things behind someone's back is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. That's why this is a principle beset by conflict. Saying true, correct, and beneficial things behind someone's back is a principle free of pain, free of harm, stress, and fever. It is the right way. That's why this is a principle free of conflict. Saying untrue, false, and harmful things in someone's presence is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. That's why this is a principle beset by conflict. Saying true and correct, but harmful things in someone's presence is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. That's why this is a principle beset by conflict. Saying true, correct, and beneficial things in someone's presence is a principle free of pain, harm, stress, and fever. It is the right way. That's why this is a principle free from conflict. Speaking hurriedly is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. That's why this is a principle beset by conflict. Speaking unhurriedly is a principle free of pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the right way. That's why this is a principle free of conflict. Insisting on local terminology and overriding normal usage is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever. It is the wrong way. That's why this is a principle beset by conflict. Not insisting on local terminology and not overriding normal usage is a principle free of pain, harm, stress, and fever. It is the right way. That's why this is a principle free of conflict. So you should train like this. We shall know the principles beset by conflict and the principles free of conflict. Knowing this, we will practice the way free of conflict. A mendicant, Subhuti, the gentleman, practices the way of non-conflict. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, the mendicants were happy with what the Buddha said. So there we are. Beautiful teaching. Beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, and beautiful in the end. Beginning with a summary of the entire teaching, the details of the teaching in the middle, and here at the end, the summary that really explains for us each of these points and how it relates to conflict and to non-conflict. So how wonderful.